I say it often, you and I are surrounded by fucking morons. And what I'm struggling with right now, I'm debating on uninstalling every single social media app, because anytime I jump on there, all I see is fucking morons. More often than not. It's disproportionate. I'm going to play this, and then I'll show you something.
Accurate history is teaching white Americans how white slave owners raped, beat, humiliated, mutilated, murdered, and cannibalized their slaves. Accurate history is teaching that George Washington's false teeth were made out of his slaves' teeth. Accurate history is teaching that Abraham Lincoln may have said some words and signed some shit, but he did not physically do anything to free the slaves. The white abolitionists also often get almost total credit for freeing the slaves. I bet you've never even asked yourself what the slaves were doing to free themselves, and the answer to that is most of the fucking work, including giving the ultimatum of war. But then we get a bunch of white people mad that their kids might feel guilty if we teach real history. It's not about your white child's feelings. Teaching accurate history isn't about white people's feelings, but that does sound like something that someone who's only ever been taught a white glorifying version of history would counter with. Ask why we ever felt like we needed to curate a false version of what white people did and did not do to black people to begin with, and then ask yourself why white-ass politicians are verbally attacking real history by calling it slurs, which is, by default, also the act of calling black people slurs. Accurate history.
And that last bit, I've never called somebody a slur. Is she talking about an actual, a real slur, like a curse word, like a slanderous fucking? Oh, these kids these days, Jesus Christ! This little black girl is fired up. She's fired up. So I left this on here because it's relevant. Said, thought you researched. And I mention this often because most people, especially the white folk who get really fired up about this stuff, they don't know about this. That's why I mention it. It's because they're not doing their due diligence. What's being shopped around right now is a superficial narrative. It does reflect reality in a number of ways, and I'll get to that in a second. But they don't know about this because this isn't shopped around. This did happen. It does reflect reality, and you should know about it. If you're going to hear about this other jazz, you should know about this. But it's purposely not circulated. That's a bad way to put it. I'm going to bed here in a minute, so that's my excuse. And that's also why I said she's a Muppet. Did you read this? With the Barbary pirates and white slaves? Because that shit took place. And so I left some more examples of this. These are keywords people could look up. They could follow this up and find information related to this. Because these people were also raped and abused and all those things that she rattled off. And they were white. The slaves were white, is my point. And it's not taught in school that there were white slaves. Just like what she's complaining about, but the flip side of that. Both should be taught in school. If she wasn't a Muppet, she would know that school is not a place for learning. Which means she's what? She's misleading people by example, which I left on here somewhere. Keep in mind, I said you're a fool, and that's being challenged currently. Said, hope you enjoyed the history lesson. Stating quote-unquote history would suffice, but I realize you were raised, and I mean likely, most likely she was, based on how young she looks, raised with extra steps. So misleading people by example likely comes natural to you, and that's probably going to go over her head. It will go over most people's heads these days. The kids are being trained to jump through extra hoops instead of thinking critically, instead of being logical in their analysis. That's why she keeps saying, accurate history. It's history. In stark contrast to fallacies. That's why other words such as fallacy exist. So you can pair the two together and compare and contrast. Instead of saying accurate history. Another reason I said she's a Muppet. So I said, understand, and I thought I'd spell this out. Understand, I don't disagree with what was said and does reflect reality. Some of what she said does reflect it. Said, your choice of wording and absolute disregard for the flip side of history is what is troubling. Nevertheless, if this gal responds, she will probably flip out. She looks like she would. Based on this delivery, she would. But this is the first time I've seen her on the internet, and who knows? I mean, she's a fired up little black gal. What the fuck do I know?